10. Tipping off the robbers. In 2018, a violent robbery left a woman in critical condition after two men stole her bag. Her bag just so happened to contain $75,000. Prior to the robbery, the woman had withdrawn money from a bank in Houston with the intention of taking it back to her business in Harris County. This was on August 17th. Working at the bank that day was Shelby Taylor Wise. Surveillance footage from inside the bank showed Shelby watching intently as the victim took out the huge amount of cash. The footage then showed Shelby getting on her phone and send a text message. A text message which police say was sent to one of the robbers. Shelby has seen how much money the woman had, and she texted a friend the woman's description so that her friend could steal the money. The two men that robbed the victim were later identified as David Dowell Mitchell and Travin Johnson. They caught the woman on the street, ran her over with their car, and then punched and kicked her before taking off with her bag full of money. All three have been locked up on charges of felony robbery. 9. Killer banker. In March of 2022, a hiker in Borno, Italy came across a dead body. The hiker found long manicured nails sticking out of a bag. These manicured nails were attached to the hand of deceased OnlyFans star Carol Maltesi. 15 other plastic garbage bags were in the vicinity, each one containing a piece of her body. Because, as it turned out, Carol had been murdered by a banker, frozen for months, hacked into pieces, and then thrown into the Italian wilderness in hopes that she wouldn't be discovered. The banker had gone through quite a bit of trouble to try and disguise her identity. He had burned her face off, mutilated her body, and she was only identified because of some distinct tattoos that the banker hadn't thought of disguising. Carol had not been on social media since January. Her friend simply thought she was on some exotic trip and didn't have access to the internet. In reality, her ex-boyfriend, high roller banker David Fontana, had killed her. He was questioned by the police, and at first he denied having anything to do with it, and then broke down and admitted everything. David said he had killed her by accident, then panicked and dumped her body. He then used her phone for 3 months to send messages to her mother and her boyfriend, saying she was still alive and had quit using OnlyFans. He even paid the rent for her house so that nobody would come looking for her. But in the end, the unmistakable tattoos on Carol's body brought David's charade tumbling down. He has since been charged with aggravated homicide, concealing a corpse, and dismemberment. 8. A large withdrawal. A customer at a Maryland bank made a large withdrawal on November 11, 2017. Nathan Michael Newell, a 19-year-old bank teller from Bel Air, was arrested shortly after on charges of home invasion, robbery, assault, and burglary. According to the Harford County Sheriff's Office, at 8:30 p.m. on the night of the 11th, Nathan rang the doorbell of the customer who had gone into his bank branch earlier to make the large withdrawal. The second the door opened, Nathan began assaulting the 78-year-old man who stood in the threshold. And when a woman stepped between them, Nathan pushed past her and ran upstairs into the house. The woman then fled her own house and ran to the neighbor's place to call the cops. By the time the police arrived, Nathan had already run away. But it didn't take long for the police to figure out what had happened. Nathan had seen how much money the individual had and then broke into his house to try and rob him. He didn't get away with any money, and the cops arrested him the next day at his work. When questioned, Nathan said he was sick of working 2 jobs and was hoping to earn enough money from robbing his customers to finally move out and get a place of his own. In the aftermath, Nathan was fired, and last we heard, was still sitting in the Harford County Detention Center. 7. Fraud at the bank. A former worker at the St. George Bank was brought up in 2021 on a whopping number of 112 fraud charges in relation to a crime syndicate she had been running. Her name is Sarah Disley from Sydney, Australia. She was initially arrested and charged with 15 fraud offenses in December of 2020, but was hit with the 112 extra the next year. She was arrested following an investigation by the New South Wales Strike Force. The charges include 72 counts of possession of false documents to obtain financial advantage, along with 26 counts of possession identity information to commit an offense. Basically, Sarah Deisley was using fraudulent documentation to make false loan applications and launder money. She worked alongside 3 other men, who were employed as accountants, to make all the fraudulent documents work to their advantage. They earned roughly $500,000 through all their fraudulent claims. And that's just the money the police know about. Because her friends were accountants and she was the bank manager, they were able to pass all the fake documents off as legit. Sarah was released from jail on bail, and last we heard, has yet to be arrested again or face any kind of punishment for her crimes. 6. Forced into a robbery. In 2015, the manager of a bank in Ohio was held hostage by 2 masked gunmen and forced to rob his own bank. Brian McConnell arrived home to find 2 men with .38 caliber guns waiting for him. The manager of Key Bank was then taken hostage along with his wife and both his children, ages 2 and 4. The men with the guns said that unless Brian went to the bank, stole between $100,000 and $200,000, and brought it back, his family would be dead. And so that was exactly what the bank manager did. Brian went to the bank at 5 o'clock in the morning, got the money and took it to his house, handed it over to the thieves, and then his family was freed. The gunmen then got into their car and fled. It took over a month before the police could finally figure out who was behind the hostage situation and the bank robbery. And during that time, they treated the McConnell family as if they were in on it. Both Brian and his wife, Katie, were forced to undergo hours of interrogation. They had to take lie detector tests, and they felt utterly violated by the police who were supposed to be tracking down the real robbers. It became such a stressful event, and both of the victims were so severely traumatized that they actually got a divorce following the robbery. The criminals were later caught by the police and identified as 18-year-old Taylor Chrisman and 23-year-old Chris Hill. Taylor was given 37 years and Chris got 25 years. 5. RURIK Jutting and the Hong Kong Murders. In 2014, RURIK Jutting, a young British banker, tortured and killed 2 Indonesian women in a luxury apartment in Hong Kong. 2 years later, RURIK was found guilty by a unanimous jury decision and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in jail. This was even though he pleaded not guilty to the murder of Sumarti Ningsi and Seneng Mujiasi, the women in their 20s whom he had brutalized. RURIK had tried to have the charge brought down to manslaughter, saying that he had disorders impeding his capacity to act rationally. But this was a Hong Kong court, and that was not going to fly. Following the unanimous guilty verdict, applause rose in the courtroom, and Justice Michael Stewart Moore said, "You get prison for life. You can go now, thank you." And that was the end of the banker. Here's what happened on that horrifying night on October 25, 2014. RURIK left his apartment and entered Wan Chai, a neighborhood known for its adult workers and red light-styled bars. RURIK had recently been transferred to Hong Kong from London by the Bank of America Merrill Lynch. He was looking to bring a woman back to his house to have some fun. What happened instead was that he tortured Sumarti Ningsi for 3 days before he finally slit her throat while he forced her to lick the inside of a dirty toilet bowl. He then jammed her body in a suitcase and went out to find his next victim. On his way, he stopped at a hardware store, picked up nails, sandpaper, and a blowtorch. He admitted in a video confession that he was planning to torture someone in the most inhumane way imaginable using these instruments. But when he got Seneng Mujiasi back to his apartment, she saw what he had planned and screamed so loud that he killed her right away. And while it was a horrible thing to do, that quick death likely saved her from the truly twisted torture the banker had in store. 4. Neil Ellerbeck. Neil Ellerbeck was the global chief of investment for HSBC. Back in 2008, his wife asked him for a divorce. Neil was worried that he would lose a large portion of his earnings, that he would lose the ability to be with his 2 children, and that his wife would take his mansion and most of his accumulated fortune. So Neil started plotting against her. The first thing he did was bug her phone calls and start reading her text messages. Neil quickly learned that his wife was having an affair with the tennis coach of their young son, and that she was also messing around with one of her childhood friends and some random chef she'd met who worked at the Ritz. One affair may have been enough for Neil to handle, but 3 pushed him way over the edge. In November of 2008, Neil beat his wife Kate to death in a fit of rage. During the trial, he was acquitted of murder and given 8 years for manslaughter, since a jury had agreed he had never intended to kill his wife, only to beat her senseless. Then, because of how long it took to wait for the trial and his good behavior once behind bars, Neil Ellerbeck, who bludgeoned his wife to death, was released after a total of only 4 years behind bars. 3. Hooked and broke. In April of 2014, a former bank executive was sent to prison for robbery. He was given 3 years for robbing approximately $1,360 from a key bank branch in Cincinnati. His name is Scott Runge, and he was once a big deal executive for PNC Financial Services. He had helped to finance about $30 million per year in loans for various things. He even lived in a house worth almost $400,000. On paper, Scott looked like he was doing really well. But the truth was that 10 years earlier, he had started dabbling with prescription medication and alcohol. Scott's experimentation with drugs and alcohol later in life led to a debilitating cocaine habit. According to what he told Judge Melba Marsh during the proceedings at the Hamilton County Common Pleas Court, he was spending about $200 per day on cocaine. He was able to function up to a point, and then was immediately laid off from his job at the bank. Shortly after, he drove from his home 6 minutes to the key bank branch, walked inside, gave a note to the teller saying that he had a weapon, and requested $3,000. He then took the money and drove back to his house. The cops found Scott's getaway vehicle parked outside his home, and when they knocked on the door, Scott was wearing the same clothes he had on earlier in the day during the bank robbery. 2. One-man heist. 50 years after a Cleveland bank robbery, the U.S. Marshals Service of Northern Ohio finally figured out who did it. His name was Theodore Conrad, although he was going by the alias Thomas Randall. When he was lying on his deathbed, slowly withering away from lung cancer at the age of 71, he finally made the confession. Theodore admitted that he'd been living under his fake name in a Boston suburb since the year 1970. Back in 1969, he was a bank teller obsessed with Steve McQueen, specifically the 1968 movie The Thomas Crown Affair. For those unfamiliar, the movie follows Steve McQueen as he pulls off bank robberies just for fun. It gave Theodore the inspiration to rob the bank where he worked. And so, on a warm July Friday, the 20-year-old bank teller walked into his work at Cleveland Society National Bank. He performed his normal duties for the day, and at the end of his shift, walked out with a paper bag filled with $215,000. Remember, this was 1969. That was equivalent to just under $2 million in today's currency. Theodore was never seen again. He vanished, having performed one of the most successful heists in history, and he did it all by himself. Theodore's robbery has been on every major mystery show from America's Most Wanted to Unsolved Mysteries. Authorities tried to track him all across the country for decades, but Theodore had outsmarted them all and kept the robbery a secret until his death. 1. The Inside Job. Jasmine Cruz and her girlfriend, Victoria McLean, were accused of robbing a Chase Bank in Texas on February 13, 2019. According to the police, Victoria McLean was actually working as a teller at the bank and had cooked up the scheme with her girlfriend. The pair had thought that since McLean was on the inside, she would be able to hand over the cash without making a big fuss about it while pretending like she was the victim. Footage from that day showed Jasmine Cruz entering the bank in a black wig. She went inside, demanded cash from her girlfriend, and then fled in a white Jeep Sahara. It didn't take long for the police to make the connection between the two women, and McLean broke down and admitted everything. She even helped return the money they had stolen together. And then both women were charged with robbery and thrown in jail. Thanks for watching. If you were a bank teller, would you rather be robbed by someone you know or a complete stranger? And if you knew them, would you ask for a cut or turn them into the police? Let us know in the comments below. See you next time.